I think that coaching is going to save our sector because coaching is about empowering others. Consulting is this is how you do it. Mentorship is this is how I did it. And coaching is how do you want to do it?
Hey everyone, this is Matt Heeman, your illustrious host of Nonprofit on the Rocks and co-founder of Vision Consulting, which is a national nonprofit search and strategy firm. And with us, as always, is the unforgettable, what's her name? Ashley Watterson, our producer. How you doing? What's her name?
I always look forward to how I'm going to be introed. That was a good one. That was a really good one. I am doing well, Matt. I think all parents can feel me here where it's like the end of summer and my kid is still home. So if there's like loud clattering or noises in the background, it's because like he has a friend over and it's just kind of still chaos. So I am looking forward, Matt, to school starting.
I don't have kids and every day is school day at my house. So I feel for you and that's all I can say to that.
Yeah, it's just a disclaimer that if you feel that my sanity seems somewhat frayed, you will know why.
I mean, that's a typical Monday for you, isn't it? Or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, really.
It's true. It's really every day. So at some point, I'm going to need a different line of excuses.
So I have very big news for you. Are you ready for this?
I'm sitting.
All right, cool. Ashley, since you've been on vacation and not paying attention to Envision, we just opened up an office in Lexington, Kentucky.
What?
Right?
Okay, that is super exciting. And I will totally admit to the fact that I am hearing this with our audience.
So for our listener out there and for you, Ashley, the most amazing person has chosen to join our firm. Her name is Amy Bryn. She is our VP of the East Coast. And can I tell you what makes me the most excited about all of this?
Can I guess?
Go for it.
My guess is you're most excited because now you're going to have an excuse to go to Kentucky where there is a lot of bourbon.
Yes, actually, you are correct. You know me, Ashley. You do. Yes. And actually, it's funny. I am going there in 2 weeks. I will be going on the Bourbon Trail. And I have to tell you, that's the selling point. Amy was like, Matt, if I join the firm and everybody's happy, you can come over here for all the free bourbon. I'll take you out all the time. And I was like, done, sealed, whatever you want. So here we are.
Amazing. So Amy, first and foremost, lives in a place where there's a copious amount of bourbon. Second to that, she's actually really good at what she does.
Yeah, it's funny. When Allison and I think about expanding Envision, what I think about is where can I go get cocktails? What Allison thinks about is where can we actually do the most amount of good? And so that's what makes us a good partnership.
That's why you and Allison work so well. There's a real yin and yang to your partnership.
Yeah, exactly. And so if anybody happens to be in that part of the country, please, please, please bother us, come by, visit Amy. She's lonely out there.
And I really hope that she knows some bourbon dealers that would want to sponsor our show now. Like, I think we need to start working this angle with Amy.
You know, dear listener, when we were in season 1 and I was really excited about this show and I thought Ashley was doing a, pretty good enough job. And
I had you fooled.
You did. And we talked about finding sponsors. And actually, what a perfect show to have a bourbon dealer, distillery, whatever, as a sponsor. And I don't think, Ashley, we ever got any sponsors. I kind of don't know, but I'm looking at you.
I think you should. But my hope is that maybe Amy and I can collab on this and do some work and get back into the sponsorship game.
Done. Let's do it because I will work for Brown Liquor, just so you know.
Will work for liquor. I have seen you holding the cardboard sign before. It's a little weird when you're doing that in the office. I don't know. Feels a little awkward, but hey.
Look, you got to get through the day somehow. So anyway, Ashley, why don't we talk about the show? You want to introduce who is coming up?
Yes, I'm super excited about this show today and your conversation with Jenny Mitchell, who is, like you, a consultant. Her company is called Chavender. And Matt, another thing super cool that our listeners need to know is Jenny lives in Canada. So this is our first international interview, Matt.
And Ashley, not only is Jenny in Canada, and not only is she a phenomenal nonprofit coach and a really good fundraiser, but I think what is really cool about this show that I'm most excited about is the way that she described coaching. I am a consultant. I like to tell people what to do, and that's it. And I learned that on the show. She is a coach. And it's such a difference. And you can even tell by the way she was answering questions. I don't know if you noticed it, but she schooled me. She schooled me on a few of my questions, and I hated it, but I also appreciated it a little bit.
No, she was amazing. I love that she schooled you. That was, of course, a highlight for me. But yeah, she really delineated the difference between a consultant and a coach. And Matt, as she was talking, I kept thinking about board builders and what a great tie-in this is for the work that Envision is now trying to do in terms of coaching boards and executives.
Such a great segue to selling Envision services, Ashley. I appreciate it. Yes, our last episode was all things board builders. And again, today, it's all things coaching, fundraising, learning how to work with your board and work with your executive director. Coaching is so, so, so important. So yet again, I will make a plug. And if you don't know about it, check out Board Builders on our website. It is a really phenomenal program that I am so proud of.
Yeah, and people can go directly to boardbuilders.net or get it through our website, either way.
Well, before we let our listener go to listen to this fabulous show, anything else, Ashley, that you want to leave before we tune out?
Just that I hope people know they can find more information about this show, about Jenny's book, which we will talk about on this episode. All that stuff is in our show notes on our website, envisionnonprofit.com/podcast. And also you can find the show streaming on YouTube.
Hey, Jenny, how you doing tonight?
Good day. I'm ready for this. I got my imbibements here right beside me.
Nice. Well, first of all, just so the audience knows, I, if nothing else, am a true professional. And as a true professional, it's 2:30 in LA. But because this is a happy hour show, I am going to imbibe myself. So thank you very much for my client meetings later in the afternoon. And while I pour myself a drink, there you go. What are you drinking tonight?
So always the preferred drink of choice is the gin and tonic. It's clean, it's crisp. You know, it's good for hot weather. It's also good for cold weather.
I love that. I don't know what happened to me, but now when I drink gin and tonics at night, I can't sleep through the night. I wake up in sweats. What is going on with that?
Well, I wonder if I've heard people say gin has like an aftertaste that sort of rumbles acidically in their bellies. So I'm the gin drinker in my family. My partner is not a gin drinker. My goal in life, Matt, is to have this gin shelf in my living room with all the, have you seen the colors? Like you can get purple. There's a Canadian one that's yellow. And I want to have this selection of gins that I kind of explore. So that's kind of my life goals.
Well, I love that life goal. When you come to LA next, I am a gin connoisseur, and now I can only drink it at lunch, and we'll see. Maybe I'll have to start waking up that way in the morning. But I have a ton of really great gins from across the world because wherever I go, whenever I go on vacation, I will always, try their local booze because why not? And then usually buy it. So to that, cheers, my friend. Actually, cheers to my first interview out of the United States, my first international interview. So cheers to you in Canada.
Awesome. I'll cheers to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first, I'd love to tell the audience a little bit about you. Can you tell us about, why you got into this nonprofit space, why coaching of nonprofit leaders? You can be in the for-profit space and make, I'm sure, a lot more money. So how did you get into this space and why nonprofit?
Well, maybe the only other profession that makes less money than fundraisers is classical musicians. So I'm being facetious, but I grew up loving classical music, playing the piano, and I was good at it, Matt. I actually lived in New York for 11 years and received a doctorate in piano. So I have lots and lots of schooling behind me. And the funny thing about that is there was a day that arrived when I went to the conservatory where I was teaching, and I said, look, guys, you got to fix these pianos in the concert hall. They're terrible. We can't have our students playing on them. And they said, well, we'd have to fundraise. And so I said, all right, well, how do we do that? What's the pieces? Do I build a committee? And I mean, I already knew I was a bit of a committee junkie. I knew that. Like, I'm a joiner. I like to make things better. And so that experience for me of bringing people together to raise money for these pianos was really a catalyst for a lot of other pieces of my life. It made me realize that there were other skills I could explore, made me realize that, ironically, I loved music. I loved music making, but I was not the kind of person to spend 4 hours by myself. I'm a chitty chatty. I'm a social, what's wrong with the world and let's fix it kind of gal. So I really dove into fund development at that point and spent a good 12 years sort of working in house as well as working as a consultant and cut my teeth that way.
Okay. So I love asking interview questions, right? Like I'm a recruiter, but that's a big part of what I do. So one of my favorite questions to ask in an interview is like, tell me about your most favorite gift. And it could be any gift, right? So in the 12 years that you were professionally fundraising, what's like one of your favorite gifts that you got?
Well, I want to tell you about it in a two-step way. I'm going to tell you about a gift I didn't get. And then I'm going to tell you how I felt and then what I did afterwards about a gift I did get. So, you know what happens where finally you're out there asking, right? You spend all this time cultivating, you get the list, you've been working, you're getting to know them, all this good stuff. And let's just say I had two that were on my radar that I committed to myself because that's how I work for this particular month. And the first one I was sure was a slam dunk, Matt. Like, it was a woman, it was someone I could really relate to. We'd had good conversations. I hadn't done maybe all my homework. In hindsight, there was a couple of open-ended questions I hadn't asked, but I almost feel like I was a little blind because it was so obvious to me. So I get on the phone and she knows it's coming because we've planned the time, and I'm speaking with her and I'm sort of setting it up. And I invite a gift of 25,000, to which she replies, oh, absolutely not. Like, this is not something I can do. Not quite. I don't know who you are or who you think I am. Like, it wasn't insulting. It was more like, you've got the wrong person. You think I'm someone else. That was kind of how it went. And I'm busy trying to hold my space on the phone, just breathing, listening, right? And like most no's, just for your audience, it ended very amicably. We both understood why it wasn't a good fit. And I was working through that initial kind of shame that kicks up. I just want to be honest. I totally got this wrong. Sort of letting it go, accepting the fact that this wasn't going to happen. And I hung up the phone and I had this feeling in my gut, Matt. I was like, oh my God, I need to ask someone right now for money, or I will never ask for money ever again.
That's hard. You know, it's interesting because I've fundraised, people who listen to the show, some of you I know have, and sometimes you get no's and it's hard. You're right, but you learn a lesson from that. And so my question for that is, talking to people who are listening, do get a no. What was it that did you ask her too much money? Did you think she had more money? Like, did you do research on her? What was it that you learned from that that you took to the next ask?
I made an assumption that she was charitable. This will be really relevant to your university folks. I made an assumption that she had an affinity without testing that she had an affinity. So just because she's known to me and there's a bit of data how she's connected, I made an assumption that this would be something that she would want to support. My impression of our conversation was, I don't have as much money as you think I do. Fair enough. Although I have to say, I wonder if I planted some seeds for a planned gift or for lots of other things simply by being in the room, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about fundraising. A no isn't forever a no. It's just a no right now. First of all, I love, because I asked you a question of your favorite gift, and I love that you started with a gift you didn't get.
Yeah.
What a great gift to tell people, what you didn't get and how you learn from that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, now tell me the positive.
So, hot sweats at home. Okay, I got to get back in the game, right? Because it's like falling off a horse. You got to get back on. So then I go to my next prospect, who again, almost exact same profile, but masculine, a guy. And I reach out to him. And actually, I didn't know his capacity, to be honest, exactly. But I knew what the range of the gifts that were coming in. So I knew peer group wise kind of where we could settle. And it was the shortest conversation I've ever had for a gift. I asked if he was ready to talk about a gift for this organization. He said, yeah, no, sounds good. What did you have in mind? remember, people are going to ask you that. So make sure you have a number. So, 25,000 was like stuck in my brain. So I said, a gift in the range of 25,000 would be wonderful. And he said, yeah, sounds about right. If I think of how many years I've been involved with this organization and I divide by the amount of enjoyment I've had, that sort of works out. He said something like $500 a year. Like, he's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I was delighted, and I was able to remember, to your audience, to do the proper follow-up. So often we forget to say, how would you like to make your gift? How would you like me to communicate with you? Do you want to do this now in one piece or in installments? He paid the whole lump sum by the end of the year, and I was calling in November. Wow. Like, it wasn't even a pledge gift. It wasn't anything. And so I kid you not, the call was about 10 minutes. I hung up the phone and I was like, what an afternoon. Right?
Wow. That's pretty awesome, though. I mean, I'm sorry about the first one, but the second one, that sounds amazing. And he right away said yes.
And then I did the happy dance. And then I called my husband and I shared with my team, like, you need to let that mojo get out there, because we know the ratio is more like, 5-1 for those lead gifts for this organization. 25,000 was a lead gift. So, and it was all in 1 year. It was stocks in the end, just heads up. It was a lot easier to give it that way.
Fine. So what advice would you give then to somebody who is a director of development somewhere and they're just beating their head against the wall? They cannot get a gift. They get like $1,000 here or there, but they have just not been able to land a major gift. What advice do you give them to keep going?
That's such a great question. So I think that we have a negativity bias as people. So we are already predisposed to see the negative, not the positive. So one of the advices I would give is, at the end of every week, write down the accomplishments, because it's very easy to start measuring yourself by the gift thermometer instead of by the actions that we're doing. So sometimes it is you're not asking enough. Sometimes it isn't you. The project doesn't resonate. Sometimes it isn't you. The case isn't fermented. There's a lot of reasons. But I think if you can put your head on the pillow and see the actions you've done during the week, and to know that you've done the legwork, you can't control the outcome, but you can control the preparation. So I always go back to reminding myself of the actions and the way I put myself out there. Most of the time when people come and coach with me, in general, what I find is it's the accountability of saying to someone you're going to do something that is one of the most powerful experiences, because once they try something, they are more likely to do it on their own and try it again. So they hire a coach. And then there's all sorts of core beliefs and things that get in your way, Matt. I'm sure as a recruiter, you see that when people show up in interviews. We are our own worst inhibitors of things. So just a reminder that owning your own accountability, like the way I told that story, I made a commitment. I was going to make 2 asks, right? Those are the 2 big ones that I had. Put it on paper, put it on a Post-it, commit to it, because being uncomfortable is the most powerful way to growing.
Yeah, you're right. Being uncomfortable I agree with you. I'm going to totally use that quote. I'm sorry. I'll say this is a Jenny quote, but I'm going to totally use that quote. Okay. So I'm going to ask a first question that we got, and then I want to get a little bit into your business and what you do, and then we'll move from there. But my first question actually is from Rebecca in Vancouver, Canada. I was so happy to get a question from Canada. She may be our only listener. I don't know. But she is. So her question is, I just don't know if I want to stay in fundraising. I love it. I love asking for money. I have just been not successful over the last year, and I don't know how to keep going. Am I in the right career? How do I know? What should I do?
Wow. Rebecca, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. And I'm sorry, my subtext of that question, I interpret it as I'm not feeling connected. Did you hear it that way too, Matt? I'm just curious if you hear it the same way.
I did. It's one thing to like lose faith in yourself. You're having a hard time. It's a hard year, but like you have to believe in that mission, and you have to believe in what you do, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about how many gifts you get. It's about, are you really making this impact?
Yeah, I interpret it as that when I see people being disillusioned from the sector, and it happens, I've certainly gone through it too, just to be honest about it. I find that that's when you turn to your peers and your mentors. So my first piece of advice is actually get out there and start talking to people about it. And it doesn't have to be sour grapes or, airing dirty laundry. It can be a bit of a reality check, because I think what's hard when you're in that situation, Rebecca, is it me or is it them? is it really me? Am I not showing up as my best version of myself every day? Or is it them? They haven't set me up strategically and structurally as a lead fundraiser to make success happen. And I think that's actually really hard to tell from the inside. So my first advice would be talk to some peers and start getting some sense of things. I can't help but put a plug in for coaching or some kind of support. And let me tell you what the difference is. One thing I find is it's great to go to conferences, it's great to get ideas, but what often happens is there's shiny objects, they go by and they don't get implemented, Matt. They become like another example of the things you didn't do. Mm. And it's not often raising the money that's the challenge, it's the systems and the processes and the structures that hold us back. So for example, if it takes you like 45 minutes to process a gift, what's the likelihood of you being able to process multiple gifts? Or if you have no way of communicating the impact of your work because you have no comms people, what's the likelihood of you being able to scale to meet your goals and quotas? So those are two good ideas. I'm a think talker. I like to talk things through. And so I would be leaning on my colleagues. I have colleagues from my CFRE study buddy days that I still meet for coffee and drinks and meals probably every 3 or 4 months because they're my sounding board. I'm very lucky to have them.
I love that. It's really important to have, if not a coach, then people to rely on. I mean, something that I always talk about being, oh my God, I just said about like a Canadian. I just did it. You're making me turn, you're making me an accent, Jenny. Something that I do think about is, okay, as an executive director, as a director of development, as a board chair, like it's lonely at the top. And so to have some kind of a round table, a group of trusted professionals, advisors, colleagues, so important. Same thing with businesses. But you're right, like having somebody else to go to, is so important. And along those lines, you started a company and I'm lonely owning a company and I have a partner. So let's talk a little bit about you. So first of all, why in the world were you like, yes, I'm going to start my own business? Why'd you do that?
Great question. And yes, it is lonely actually. I've had some bonuses lately because I've had a colleague come into the business. She's works for me as one of my co-coaches and she's out west. I told people that when I started Chavender, my whole goal was to have great team meetings. That was my total goal. So to set up Chavender, I need to back up and say that from a lifestyle perspective, when I got into fundraising, I had 2 little kids under my feet. And my goal was just to do the work. It wasn't to own a business. So I subcontracted to a lot of consultants, people like yourself and other folks, and learned a heck of a lot in a short amount of time. Now, I am predisposed for entrepreneurship. My mom ran a small business for 20 years and doing retail, and my dad was a sales rep for a technology company. So it was in my blood, and it was something that was much more comfortable for me. So I feel for you guys that have always had like full-time jobs with a company and that idea of stepping out on your own and being responsible for your monthly cash flow. Like I say to my friends, I'm like, so you understand that if I do nothing, no money automatically deposits in my bank account every 2 weeks. So if I'm obsessed with pipeline, pardon me, because now it's not just my livelihood, it's my team's livelihood, Matt. So I think I was predisposed. And the sequence was I got comfortable subcontracting stuff. And at one point, there was an event that happened that the person I was working for had no more work for me. And there was this really interesting moment where I went, oh, well, I guess I have to create a website then, because how are people going to find me? And I guess I need to. And so these I guess I's kind of came around. And I've always been a people person. So my business has grown through my relationships and contacts. I can track all the way back to the beginning of my business. What's been fun is I love the business part just as much as the fundraising and the coaching part. I really do.
That's interesting. What about the business part do you like?
It's like a Rubik's Cube. You push this and this happens. You push this and this happens. I love the freedom. I definitely love the autonomy. So I screw up big time. It's my screw up. I achieve big time. It's my achievement.
That's interesting. That's true. You do have flexibility. You're right. And if you do screw up, it's on you. The scary thing, though, the very scary thing for me and my business partner is you are only as good as your last client. And, yes, if you screw up, that's one thing. But if it's bad and it gets out there, not great. So that is, to me, the scary thing. But this leads me to our next question, and it's one of my favorite names. So this is somebody that I know here in LA. Her name is Claudette. And I was talking about you and interviewing you and what you did. And she is also a professional fundraiser. And she wanted to know from you, Jenny, how she should know if she could maybe transition into coaching,
It's a great
if
question.
it's like something that A is viable, B, like, should she do it? You don't know her, but what advice would you give to somebody who's like, maybe it's time for me to be a coach?
Yeah. I think that coaching is going to save our sector. That is not an overstatement. Let me tell you why. Because coaching is about empowering others. Coaching is about not coming in and fixing, just to be clear, like just for some light. Let me back up. Consulting is this is how you do it. Mentorship is this is how I did it. And coaching is how do you want to do it? And so I think that coaching and bringing in a coach approach into some of our not-for-profits is going to save our bacon, because one of the best ways to keep people is to help them keep growing and not fix things, but allowing people to grow in their roles through a coach approach, A, keeps them, B, allows all of the organization to learn about a coach approach, and C, the retention is powerful. I'm seeing more and more organizations pay for their senior leadership to have coaching certifications. And the reason is that it benefits everybody on the team. Claudette, if you could find like a mini course or some kind of a tool, I use the Enneagram assessment. It's kind of a simple tool. You could get certified in that to help you kind of have a toe in or some kind of a platform that you could work and practice with your teams as a starting point to see if you like it. What if you were also their coach? What if you got a chance to grow your skills and you included them in the journey? That's a powerful conversation to have with your employees.
That's great advice, by the way. I hadn't even thought about that because as a CEO, having one of your employees or C-suite become a certified coach, how amazing would that be for the rest of the team? That's great. I love that idea. Thank you. So, two things that came into my mind. First, I'm a consultant. I am not a coach. And as you said, a consultant likes to tell people what to do. I always tell people what to do. And I couldn't be a coach because it's just not in my blood. And so the second thing that came into my mind, and I'm asking you this for a reason as a coach, is one of my favorite questions to ask in an interview. And then I'll give you my answer, which is kind of going back to the consulting thing. One of my favorite questions to ask in an interview is, what would somebody who doesn't like you tell me about you? Okay. As a coach, you are coaching somebody who's about to be interviewed by me for a C-suite position. As a coach, Jenny, what would you want them to say?
Right. So coaches don't want anyone to say anything, just to play that game, because we're not in charge. The coachee is in charge. But the question I would ask is, if you were honest about your blind spots, what would they be? Can you identify them? And most importantly, how are you actively working on mitigating them or addressing them? Because nobody needs another cookie cutter leader who only spews out the things that people want to hear. I think that people want 3D leaders who are aware. For example, I'm a shiny object gal. I'm like the next new thing. And in the Enneagram, I'm an enthusiastic visionary. So I'm a wonderful person to be in charge and leading. That being said, the downside or the thing I'm working on, Matt, to use the language of the coach, is that sometimes I skip over things and I miss the opportunity to savor a moment. And so the thing I'm actively working on as a leader is we are here today in this podcast. I am enjoying you and the moment we're creating together rather than thinking about the next thing, because that's just my busy brain.
I love that answer. I don't appreciate the wins. I'm always on the next thing, and therefore it doesn't allow me to appreciate the wins, which, I want. I love that. No one's answered the question like that before, and I would love that answer. Going back to that consulting thing, right? The difference between a consultant and a coach. Somebody would say, who doesn't like me, very easy, that I'm a know-it-all, that I think I know better, and I don't care what you think. And the truth is, I do think I know better, which is what makes me a really good consultant. That's why I love that question. But I love the answer you gave. What a great answer.
Matt, here's another way to look at it. You know better for you, but you don't necessarily know better for me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we're building systemic leadership, if we're building systemic structures, if we're building people, it's sort of the difference between swooping and empowering. I talk about this in parenting. This is my new obsession. I have a thing that says, stop mothering your teams. We come in and we mother them, we fix it for them. And it's this swoop mentality. And it's like, no, actually, we're going to let them follow this train of thought. You might think it's a stupid idea, but they actually have to see what the repercussions are of that. Very hard to do as a leader. I have to sit on my hands, right? But the nuance here is that you are the consultant. So you are responsible for the bottom line, which is why your expertise has been hired and which is why this is the process we're going to follow. In my world, we assume there's some kind of a structure or process. And my job is to help someone clarify for themselves what's most important from this process. Isn't that cool?
I love it. I love this so much. See, this is fun.
You're a great interviewer. Lots of good questions. And
thank you.
I'm really willing to kind of change it up because I am challenging you a little bit here.
I know, but I so appreciated that. You're a coach, right? Okay, so I have one more question from an audience member, and then we're going to pivot to the candidate side. But one last question. It's from Orlando in Chicago. I wish he lived in Orlando, Florida. Anyway, he writes, I'm so done with my director of development. She is not doing a good job. She has not brought in any money in the last year. And I don't know what to do because I like her as a person, but I'm not sure if she's strong enough as a DOD. When do I bring in a coach? And when is it too late and it's time to let her go?
Wow. So I'm assuming that Orlando is her boss or his boss. Is that correct? Just want to clarify.
What I'm getting out of it is that Orlando is the executive director.
Cool. So obviously, there is something about the director of development that's not gelling. It could be the specificity, that what most obvious, not money not coming in. It could be the time that's being spent, in the executive director's opinion, in the wrong buckets. Sidebar, this is going to be funny, but Orlando, I almost always side with the director of development until proven otherwise. And you may not like that answer, but in my experience, directors of development are so misunderstood. And there are two kinds of racehorses with directors of developments. There are the hurdle jumping racehorses, the achievers that basically go after the money like a Rottweiler, and we love them, but they are terrible managers, by the way. Or we have the manager type who are really good at managing people, but not great with holding a target or a bag. And those two really very rarely coexist together. You kind of get the racehorse or you get the manager. So that being the preface, is it time for a courageous conversation with the director of development? Is it time to ask permission for a courageous conversation about her work and your role in the work? And let me explain how I frame those questions so that there's a safe space or like a bracket around it. Asking if we can set aside a specific time for it. I don't think it's something that just gets surprise on our Monday meeting. We're going to talk about this. There are three important parts. Part one is speak your truth and don't hold back. Say it in the pursuit of learning and of understanding between the two of you, and speak your truth. This is how I experience this. These are some of the examples of things that have been underperforming, and try and use concrete examples. Number two is ask her to speak her truth and listen like mad. So she may have a completely different experience, Matt, of the exact same components. And your job is to listen and not interrupt, not defend, and not deflect, both sides. So that's 1 and 2. Now here's the interesting one. 3 is you talk about whether you want to mutually make a plan to go forward. Because if one of the people doesn't want to make a plan to go forward, then you have the grounds for parting ways. But you may be surprised when you are able to speak frankly and directly with radical candor in the pursuit of growth and improvement, not in the pursuit of the past, but in pursuit of the forward part. Nobody likes to be told all the things they did wrong in the past, but the idea of going forward, you might be surprised, Matt, at what the outcome actually is from that conversation.
The one thing that I have had challenges with myself as a boss, as a leader, is having those uncomfortable conversations with my staff, right? Like, I love coming to work and shooting this shit and like just having a good time with my
Mm-hmm.
team. We even have happy hour at 5. We have a good time. But
Yeah.
then there are times that you gotta have those uncomfortable conversations. You've let the company down, you've let the
Yeah.
client down, you're not doing a good job, you're whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's hard to have those uncomfortable conversations.
It's hard to keep your mind open when you have uncomfortable conversations. That's actually the tricky part, because without filling in the blanks and making the assumptions, that's why I often encourage people to use specific examples, because you'd be amazed how often when you say it from your side, then you hear how they perceived it. You're like, what? But it requires, and just keep in mind, the person with the most perceived power is responsible for the space.
Interesting. Do you mind going into that just a little bit more?
Sure. So if you are the boss, it is your job to create the safe space. It's not your employee's job to create the safe space. I'm not a diversity expert, but what I'm learning is that because of the color of my skin and my status, it's my job to own the space and help make people feel comfortable. I can't control whether they feel comfortable or not, Matt, but it's my job to make the attempt.
Something that I want people to hear if you're listening to this, and we're going to pivot now to the next part of the show, Jenny, which is going to be about your advice to people interviewing, looking for work, and showing up at their job. But I do want to say, like, when I ask people what kind of boss they are, would I want to work for them, all that good stuff, I hate, I can't even say how much I hate it. Well, I have an open door policy. I hate that answer.
I know.
That's not a good answer. That just means you're waiting for people to come to you. It's a power move. And everybody in the world should have some kind of open door policy where anybody can come talk to you. But I want to hear you say, I go to my team, I go to their office.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just expect them to come to me.
I thank you for bringing that up too, because I'm nuts about women's leadership and the style of women's leadership. And let me just say, we are done with the top-down hierarchy and we are building new collaborative models of leadership that are a little bit uncharted. So it's a bit messy still. And so that open door policy is kind of one of those remnants of, well, if I'm compassionate, I leave the door open. And I say to you, well, actually, no. First of all, if you're compassionate, you tell people when you're available. If you're compassionate, you kind of check in on them. The word compassion means to suffer alongside. It means to be in partnership in the suffering. And so when you challenge someone to accountability, you actually by default also must have compassion for them, because you can't give them accountability without agreeing to suffer alongside them. And I love that. I use the word ambition and compassionate because I think those are a real cross section. That's sort of like the oxymoron. I can be really aggressive and go for my goals full on. Like I wrote a book this year. I had to hustle like mad for that. But I can also have great compassion for my authors that are in the book. I can care deeply about the people I work with and hold them to really high standards. As a matter of fact, if you really love them, you expect the best for them, not for you.
Huh. I love that. I didn't know what compassion meant. That's cool. Suffer beside them. I like that.
Yeah.
That's twice, Jenny. There's 2 things I'm going to quote you on. We'll see. We'll see how many we get at the end of the show. Okay. So your company, the tagline that is empowering women leaders to step out, be seen, and lead, which is a great segue to our next session. I think part of DEI that people don't think about when they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is you have a lot of staff in your company that should be trained, should be taught, should be listened to, should be heard from, should be moved up, not just looking from folks outside. And so I have a few questions from the audience from internal staff who are looking to do exactly what you said, step out, be seen, and lead. So one of the questions that I have, it's a no-name question, is I'd like some advice on how I can help with my confidence. I am struggling every day coming to the office. I have no confidence in myself anymore.
I want to give them a big hug. Can we start with that?
I know. I got that question and I was like, oh, this is so sad, but okay.
And vulnerable. Brave. Super, super brave. So thank you. Thank you to whoever it is who's speaking to that. So there's a couple things that come to mind. You know, I now believe that if we heal the humans, the fundraising works itself out. I know that's really simplistic. Every time I've come in to address the fundraising, I've found that there's this wonderful human being that is looking to strengthen themselves. And so perhaps with this particular question, can you look inwards? That sounds so hokey. I sound like Buddha. But here's where I'm going. And I'm going to be very transparent here. Where is the sadness coming from? Where is the lack of confidence coming from? So there are external elements of lack of confidence and there are internal elements of lack of confidence. Internal is the stories that you were told growing up about yourself. I talk a lot about core beliefs, those things that stop you from being happy. I talk a lot about liking yourself, Matt. It's like one of my core goals in life is to like myself, because loving myself might be too far. But liking myself, I just love this idea, when you practice kindness to yourself. And so when I listen to that statement from that caller, I think, how could you start liking what you do and who you are just a little bit more than yesterday? Like, let's start really, really small. And the other thing I would say is confidence comes from inside, an internal validation of yourself, not from outside. As much as I am the textbook hurdle jumper, if I just get one more degree, then I'll have the confidence.
I hear that all the time, and it doesn't, and it isn't.
It lingers, it stays with you. And I would just put a plug in here. I personally was helped through therapy. I went to therapy I've been to multiple times, but it really helped me get in touch with who I was. And I mention it on this call because there's therapy and then there's coaching. They're different. But I find that a lot of smart people who are really good with their brains, who are quick, get disconnected from their feelings and their body. And that disconnect eventually will show up. And so when you're feeling that lack of confidence, I think it behooves us to ask why. What is it? What's going on? And find some people who can help you with that, because all the other stuff will roll out once you have that mojo back. Pause. Matt, I have to say one more thing. Sometimes our workplaces are not safe for us. Sometimes it's the workplace that is creating the lack of confidence. And perhaps you are unable in that workplace to figure that out, which is another reason to go and find someone else external to kind of process through that. I just felt I needed to say that.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And that's always a question of, well, maybe I shouldn't be here any longer either, right? So my sister told me something that I think is really important to add to that when you're talking about liking yourself. And she said, every single time you walk through a door, think about something you like about yourself. That's it. And tell yourself, this is something I'm proud of, or this is something I like, or this is something you do great. And I've actually been starting that. And it's not easy, by the way, because you walk through a door like a lot. But I do think that it's been really helpful. And I think that it's something that people should also practice. So I love that. I love that. That's great advice.
From a coaching perspective, from a neurological perspective, we are hardwired to remember the bad because we don't want to get eaten by the jaguar around the corner. Right? So we remember the negative. We have a negative bias by definition neurologically. So you actually need 3 positives to counteract a negative. So every time you stand in front of a mirror and you say, oh, look at those wrinkles again, right? In my world, I similarly, wow, have I ever got great arms? Wow, I like my smile. Wow, I've got good hair. No, there's no gray hair yet, right? So just sort of counteracting that doorway is a great analogy, but just know that it's biological. It's not you.
That is so interesting. Well, what I say about the wrinkles is I don't have any because I put a lot of Botox in my face. So if I see a wrinkle on my face, it is time to go get some more poison. That's what I say.
And again, that is to feel good in your body and enjoy yourself. If that means liking yourself, Matt, I say go for it. Like, I'm not into bubble baths. This whole self-care, take a bubble bath. I'm like, I hate bubble baths.
Agreed. I don't like baths. I feel like you're in your own gross, dirty water. So part of the coaching that you do, I think that's really important, and something that I do think that some of our listeners can grow from would be, we place people a lot at organizations. They're new. They're maybe in the C-suite, but they're new, and there's a leadership table, there's a C-suite table, and they don't quite know how to be seen. They don't know how to be seen by their boss or their colleagues, right? So as a coach, what would you tell folks to ensure that they have that visibility, that they feel comfortable at the table,
Yeah.
that their input matters?
Yeah. The term people use is executive presence, right? And most of the time I take that term and I break it down and I ask, so what does it mean to you? Well, it means that when I have an idea, I'll express it, or it means that I'll feel comfortable to reach out to a colleague after a meeting and check in with them, right? So we unpack that. And then I go through some open ended questions like, what would help me feel more comfortable in those situations? And what is it that I'm looking for? What is my end goal? Because often we put these unrealistic expectations on ourselves that we're supposed to show up at week one and have all the answers, even though have never been at that table before. I think on a simple practical level, people want to know, how much do I talk and how much do I not talk? Like, I think that's actually an essence of executive presence. And in groups, remember, we're all receiving each other's energy. I mean that specifically energy. There's a vibe in the room. And so when you're new into the center, into the space, it actually behooves you to just sit and experience the group first. I don't think your first goal with executive presence is to right away step out, be seen. And then the second advice I have is to build networks into each of your peers separate from that group think experience, because it's a little bit like board members, right? Once you've had drinks or coffee with them, they really can't vilify you the same way because you are a human being. So number one, respect the energy in the room. Number two, build peer networks to individuals within the group. And number three, set a mantra or an intention for those potentially stressful or new situations. Mine always start with, I know that. I know that I'm a kind and decent person and that I have something valuable to contribute. You know, having some kind of a mantra that you have in front of you when you're in those meetings on your piece of paper or somewhere, especially if there's someone in the room that throws you off, because that happens too, can be incredibly grounding because you're taking ownership of your presence.
Cool. I love that. Okay. If I think I need a coach, people call you, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about in order to call you?
Yeah. Goals. What's the purpose of this? And coaching is an investment. Is it a coaching for a career move? Is it a coaching for comfort, like feeling better in your skin? So you have to have a goal. You have to have an arc. Coaching takes time, sort of somewhere between 6 and 12 months is a typical contract. And you need time between, because these touch points become the check-ins, if you will, right? But as the growth is happening. So we know that if you change your perception, your world changes. And that's what we're talking about with coaching. So I think you have to know what your objectives are. I think you have to be ready to commit, right? Because it's brave work. You've always done it that way. Somebody's going to ask questions and make you poke and probe. And if you're investing, you don't want to be deflecting those back out. It's also the coach's job to create a safe space so you feel like you can explore that. And who do you want on your team? So obviously your coach is on your team, but you may want your boss on your team. And that goes into money, who pays and all that good stuff, which, to be perfectly transparent, I have clients that pay completely for their own coaching. I have clients that split it with their organization. I have clients that the organization pays 100%. The only thing that really changes is the sponsorship piece, because if the organization is investing, I want them to have a say in the beginning, the middle, and the end point of the coaching experience, because I find that allyship in the office works. So that if you have a direct report and they're working on their executive leading of the all staff meeting on Tuesday mornings and having more presence, I'd really like their boss to know about that so that they can provide real-time feedback to it. And all of the sponsorship relationships I've had have been incredibly respectful. I will also say the confidentiality always stays between the coach and the coachee. And I'm very transparent about that from the very beginning.
It's so interesting you're talking about paying for the services. So when I have applicants who get hired for a job, I always advocate to the board or to their boss to include coaching in their offer. So I didn't realize that it could be done together with the CEO, but I do advocate for it. Honestly, we can all use coaching, every one of us.
Well, and the stakes are so high. Somebody was saying the other day that a not-for-profit CEO is the only job where their boss, in theory, changes every 2 years. imagine just managing that alone.
Right.
And so that coaching, what it does is it bridges the gap between the new hire and the relationship with the chair, because hopefully you've got a solid board chair if you're hiring, and they get a chance to navigate their relationship so that the carnage is not felt at the board and the staff level.
So let's say that you're coaching one of your clients and they really want another job and they're up for an interview and it is a chief development officer. What are some things that you recommend that they do so that our listeners out there who are looking for a new job, what are some things that they can do?
Really important, especially chief development officer jobs, to speak to your accomplishments. They're not going to hire you if you whiffle waffle around and don't talk about gifts and sort of talk in broad terms, right? So you've got to be able to come to the table with, from this particular portfolio for this amount of people, this is how I move the portfolio. These are the percentages. You don't have to have all the packages, right? All the different lanes, but you have to be able to speak to one of them with data and information. I love for examples. So for example, with this particular donor, da, 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 da. So crafting your stories that support your interview process. I don't know anybody on this planet, and I love to talk for a living, who can come up with a great story on the fly with the examples. So I will work with them on what are the key messages or the key points I want this interview panel to remember about me, based on the job description, by the way. We write for the grant application, so we prepare based on the job description. If they're mentioning, mounting the strategic planning, how can I pull my content and my background to speak directly to that, but really put quantifiable examples around it? Sometimes I call those key accomplishments, and I like to highlight those in a resume. And then to your point about describe your leadership style, it's always there, right? Again, it becomes a bunch of words and adjectives unless you can do a for example. For example, I can speak to a time when I had a low performing employee. The steps I took were, I worked with HR on X. We had multiple conversations. In the end, it worked out great, or in the end, I had to let them go. It doesn't matter. The for example, to me, adds the color and the approach. Final thought, and I don't think we talk about this enough, words and pacing. Can you hear even how, as I'm slowing down my voice here, it's a heck of a lot easier for you to understand what I'm saying, Matt. Mm-hmm. And B, my radio friends that are women talk about how they lower their voices for radio because subconsciously a lower voice gives them gravitas and confidence. But I do know that when I'm on the interview panel, when people slow down a little bit, speak a little bit clearer, and really think thoughtfully about what they're going to say, and that they've prepared well, it really shows.
Interesting. You're right. People should speak slower. I do not. I speak too fast and I'm too excited. And I try to remind myself of that, but I do not. So it is important. So the very first question that I ask in an interview, very first, is, what questions do you have for me? And what I will tell people all the time, whenever they go for an interview, is make sure you do your research. Please, please, please. If it's a nonprofit, look at their 990, go on their socials, look at their website, do your research. And actually, somebody told me a long time ago, if you're going for a director development job or an executive director job, make a donation and see what happens.
Totally. That's brilliant. Actually, that should be non-negotiable, actually, Matt. Let's just make that a non-negotiable from now on.
Make a donation and see if they even reach out and thank you or anything. And then you can come in and you can talk about that. And wow, what a great way to start.
One of my favorite questions from an interviewee perspective is, I assume that at this point in the interview process that I am at least in the final 3 candidates. As a professional and as somebody who's ready to commit to your organization and to your mission, are there any skeletons or challenges from the last 3 years that you'd like to be honest and tell me about now so that I can do a good job of coming into the situation eyes open and being able to bring my best self forward?
I love that. And hopefully they're honest, right? Like, people are not always honest on the interview panel, but I love that question. Such a great question. So I want to ask you one horror story, but I'm going to give you mine and then I want yours. So the best horror story that ever happened, and it happened to me, is I got hired by two different organizations, and I've been executive director three times. So anybody who wants to do their research, good luck. But the two organizations, the board members had no idea what was going on at the organization, no idea. And so when I looked at their 990 and I asked them for their budgets and all the things, they were like, there's nothing bad, right? They had nothing bad to say. Well, turned out that one of the organizations I took over hadn't paid payroll taxes in 3 months, hadn't paid their health insurance invoices for 3 months. That meant that the staff weren't covered. And so in that time, two employees went to the hospital, weren't covered. And so the organization was on the hook for $100,000. Again, board members didn't know that. And so you can ask all the questions in the world you want to ask. Sometimes you come into a job, they don't know. So it is one of those things that's one of my favorite horror stories is I learned very early on, board members don't know everything. And like you can ask for the world, they just don't know. So that's my fun horror story.
Yeah.
All right, you as a coach, you have dealt with a lot of staff, I am sure. What's something that just makes you chuckle that you want to share?
Well, I look back on my naivete, Matt, is what I would say. And I would do certain things differently. This may not sound like a horror story, but it was a horror story to me. So I decided to take a consulting gig and embed myself with an organization. And it was brand new, fresh, green, no fundraising really. I mean, they'd been getting grants, but I thought I could do it. Like I really genuinely thought we had some potential. And one of the things they told me was we have, good relationships back to our alumni. So, we have over 400 people that we have connections with. I'm like, okay, I can build a pipeline out of that. Like it's not 1,000, but like we're not starting from scratch. So I get in there. Their definition of a prospect pipeline, first of all, there's no database. Okay. It's an Excel spreadsheet. These are teenagers. It's a youth program. I have the Facebook handles were the best, most useful part. Do you know how many times an 18-year-old changes their email and their phone number? And I was totally sold a bill of goods. Now, they didn't do that on purpose. They actually had no idea what I was talking about. That's, I think, the horror story thing is asking questions in a way to get the answers you need. Like, could I have asked it as, can you describe to me more of how you hold your data? Can you tell me more about these people that you have contact information for, right? And the other thing that happened at that organization that I will never forget, and this is a good lessons learned. So I'm giving you two. It wasn't a horror story really, but it was, again, a good example of, I think back to some of those questions about confidence that you asked of those folks. I had a CEO who I was reporting to who was very sort of self-contained, and he was giving me very little as far as feedback. And so I was in charge of the fund development portfolio as a in-house. And I was working my tail off on these grants, which were being owned by the programming people, right? But I was intimately involved in the planning, the writing, all this, the coaching, all this stuff. And I remember we came to our Friday standing meeting about grants, and he turned to me and he said, well, you don't get to count any of that grant work. Those are not net new. So they're not net new grants. So really you haven't done anything in the portfolio. And I was completely speechless, actually. I didn't know what to say because I was working to the other callers we had earlier, working so hard, Matt. And the fact that he didn't see that those grants could be amplified or grown with some expertise, and they only wanted net new and very in the lane, right, Matt? Not to negate that I was absolutely preparing a special event. I was working on alumni relations. I had all sorts of other leads and networks, but the myopicness of that. And then the result being, what am I going to do? Not help them with the grants.
That's really screwed up. I'm sorry. That is really screwed up and unfair. So unfair. Okay. So you're a coach. Let's say you're a coach of you at that point. What do you tell your coachee?
Yeah. So as a coach, I'm there to validate their experience, but not validate their choice. It's not my job as a coach to say you did the right thing or the wrong thing. Who cares? I'm the coach. But I would have asked some questions about what would you have liked to have heard? How could you go back and given a little bit of space, make some notes for yourself and respond in a different way? And what do you desire going forward? Are you okay with letting go of those grant applications that are tied to programming, because that's perfectly fine. It is. But he needs to know what the ramifications of that are going to be. So I think the theme is, how can you go back and own your space? And you know, the end of that story, right? Is that I stayed another 3-4 months and then I left because they were not structurally set up to grow fundraising, and they couldn't start the culture and the behaviors that were going to encourage fundraising seeds to grow. And I felt, wait for it, unappreciated.
Oh, 100%. I'm surprised you lasted 3 months. I would have been out of there the next day. So, all right, tell me, as a coach, what's like the favorite thing of your job?
Oh gosh. Well, so there's a moment in coaching where every coaching session has like a cycle to it. There's, most of them are about an hour, some of them aren't, where people come in and we're both searching for what the kernel, the essence of the conversation is going to be. Because I often talk about content and context, right? So they might talk about things, but it's not the things they want to talk about. There's something underneath. And somewhere along the way, I'll ask the question, what is this conversation really about? And at that moment, there's this light bulb that goes off where the person says, oh, I just realized, or this is something that I've seen before, or I need to have that conversation with X. That to me it's almost like dropping into sixth gear on a really nice car. You find sixth gear, it's like butter. Then we're like conversing on a different plane. And even through Zoom, there's an energy in the room that you can kind of capitalize on and leverage, Matt. And it feels very sacred, very special to be in partnership with someone like that, who's ready to be that vulnerable. I always love meaningful conversations. The relationship is the conversation. Matt, you and I are having this moment together. Our relationship is forged through this conversation, and it will carry along with us. No matter where we go, what places and circles we go on, I will always remember this moment that we created together, and all these people that are listening to us right now.
The thousands and thousands and thousands. That's what we're putting out there. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Okay, so last part of the show, I want to talk about you for a second. So first of all, you have a book. Like, who has time to write a book? What is your book about?
So my book is called Embracing Ambition, Empowering Women to Step Out, Be Seen, and Lead. Available on Amazon, might just say. And I think this book really encapsulates what I'm about. I thought about writing a book myself, and I was like, oh my God, that sounds so boring. So what would make it fun? I asked myself that question. I coached myself through it, and I said, I want to do it in partnership with women. And I also don't think my voice is the only voice that needs to be heard. So I set about curating 12 women CEOs, myself as one of them, from different backgrounds, different worlds. Many are not for profit. That's part of my story, but some aren't. We have an interesting one that's a crown corporation, which is like a government agency that makes its own money, like some really fascinating people. Some of them are from Girl Scouts. Some of them are from the food sector. Some of them do sponsorship. And we created our stories and crafted our stories to go in the book together. We spent a weekend together, Matt. The book is about the research on the lived experience of women. There are 5 pillars of experiences married to first person stories about what it feels like to lead as a woman. And I'm very proud of that. In the end of every pillar, there are reflection questions, because I'm a coach. And you could use this for your senior leadership team. You could use this for a book club. And the goal would be the discussion, the conversation that comes out of reading these stories and asking the question, has this ever happened to you? And what would you do about it? So that's what the book's all about. It's a very enjoyable read. It's part of it's funny, part of it's dark, but it's a really nice compendium to like those heavy leadership books.
I like that. I'm not the best book reader, but if your book is written in any way like this show and how amazing you are, I can only imagine how beneficial it would be, how enjoyable it would be to read. And we will post it all over our socials and on our website. And I hope people hear this and go out and purchase it, because you're amazing. And I'm sure going to be amazing. All right. And then my last
Okay.
question is your company. Tell us about your company. Tell us about where folks can find you and why somebody listening right now should look for you and hire you.
Thank you for that. That's very generous. And the first thing I'm going to do is spell my company name. So Chavender is spelled like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning. A Chavender is a fish. So sidebar, I'm a Pisces, just saying. But a Chavender exists on the east coast of North America, and it can survive in fresh water. It can exist in the briny mix of ocean and fresh water. Even if the boats go by and kind of swirl up the ground, the Chavender survives. And that is why I named my company that, because whether it's fundraising or leadership, the only component that's constant is change and adapting. And I just love that analogy. So to find me, Jenny@chavender.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, but Jenny Mitchell, pretty generic name. You'll probably be more likely to find me at lavender.com.
And why should somebody find you and reach out to hire you?
The world is inundated with systems and processes and techniques and what's the word? Like do it this ways. Okay. You can go to anybody's website and find their 4 ways to do fundraising or whatever it is. My interest, my passion is that everybody has inside them a natural, innate way that they are going to do things. And that knowing permeates not just your professional work, but actually your personal work. Like, I actually think at this point in my life, I'm building great humans, helping people become better humans. And by the way, the fundraising flows from there, because when you like yourself, when you are confident in your own gifts and skills, the fundraising and the work and everything just flows right out of it. So I'd like to think that I help people great in their skin. I often talk about helping number 2s become number 1s in work and life.
All right. Well, I like that very much. I have so enjoyed this show, Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a phenomenal evening. It's, not quite 4, and I've already had enough bourbon to get me through the evening. So I appreciate you, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Matt.
So, did you learn anything from our new favorite coach, Jenny?
I learned so much from Jenny, and mostly I thought it was just me that when I start communicating for any length of time with someone with an accent, I start to slip into that accent. It happens most with like British people.
I feel like we all do that, especially when it's British people. We just start doing it. Our intonation changes, and it cracks me up because I don't believe that British people do that with Americans. I was at the airport. I was at like JFK, and we were waiting for the flight, and like this British couple was drunk, and they were just chatting up the storm. And so I just started to talk to them as well. And literally halfway through, I was like, oh my God, guys, I'm talking to you in this worst British accent. And they laugh and they laugh. They're like, don't worry, you dumb Americans do it all the time. So it isn't just us.
I mean, what you left out of that story was, yes, they were drunk. How many old fashions were you into the flight at that point?
Actually, when I travel to Europe or really anywhere, my drink of choice is a gin and tonic.
Interesting, because you did mention that you can't drink gin and tonics late at night now because you can't sleep.
I know
You only day drink.
It's really terrible because I do like gin, but yes, I cannot drink it anymore. I don't know what happened. Something happened, and now I wake up with sweats. I don't get it. But anybody else out there who drinks gin and then can't sleep, and you figured out how to fix it, I would love to know.
You know what they need? They need a pillow with Matt's face on it.
Yeah.
I think that is the key to a good night's sleep. Can you believe we're going to end yet another episode on the Matt pillow?
I just want everybody to hear that the sexual harassment that I get from you on a regular basis, Ashley, is like unacceptable. Unacceptable. When are you going to learn? When are you going to learn?
On that note, tune in to the next episode.
Thank you for talking about the next episode. It's going to be great. It's with my friend Sid, who runs the Mexican American Opportunity Foundation. What an amazing CEO he is. And I think it's going to be a really phenomenal show. Also, he's hilarious. So I may be building this up to our listener who's already fast forwarded through us, but it's going to be a great show. So I hope everybody tunes in for that. And before we let everybody go, Ashley, any last thoughts? Or are you just going to have a nice dream on your pillow with my face on it?
Yes. Sweet dreams, everyone.